My name is Lowell, and if you'd asked me just a year ago how things were going with my wife, I probably would have said fine. Not perfect, not exciting, just fine. And that word, so ordinary, so easy to say, was the first quiet crack in everything I thought was solid. Her name is Maureen. We've been married for 14 years. I still remember the first time I saw her at a mutual friend's engagement dinner in Durham. She was wearing a navy blue dress with sleeves that kept sliding down her shoulders, and she kept tugging them up between sips of red wine. She laughed too hard at her own jokes and talked about how she hated small talk. I was hooked. Back then, we were magnetic. Not loud about it, not over the top, but there was a gravity between us. Conversations felt effortless. She'd rest her feet on my lap during long drives, and I'd trace letters on her skin when we sat in silence. We were quiet people, but not like this. Not like what we became. About 4 months ago, something shifted. No fights. No slammed doors. Just small things. A delay in her response. A glance that lingered past me instead of on me. She stopped laughing at my stories. Stopped asking about my day. I'd walk in the door from work, say, hey, and she'd nod. That's it. No kiss. No warmth. Just that nod, like I was a guest renting space in her life. At first, I chalked it up to stress. Her job had been demanding. She works in some niche finance role that I've never fully understood, and I assumed it was weighing on her. I tried to be supportive. I cooked dinner more, cleaned up after the dog, gave her space when she seemed exhausted. But her silence didn't come with gratitude. It came with distance, a steady, relentless drift. Then came the nights she stayed up after I went to bed. The screen glow under the door. The hushed voice in the kitchen, too quiet to catch any words, just enough to know it wasn't for me. I asked once, gently, if everything was okay. She said, I'm just tired. Don't make a thing out of it. So I didn't. I held back. I swallowed my instincts. I thought maybe she needed room. Maybe I was being dramatic. I mean, not every silence is a storm, right? But weeks passed. No affection. No real conversation. Not even tension. Just this indifferent, invisible wall that kept growing between us. I felt like I was screaming into a canyon, and all I got back was my own echo. The worst part wasn't the loneliness. It was the shame. The way I started blaming myself. Maybe I wasn't interesting enough anymore. Maybe I had become too routine, too ordinary. I started second-guessing every word I said. Every moment I tried to reach out and was met with a blank stare felt like I was being erased a little more. Then, one morning on a Sunday, of all days, I woke up before her. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the floor for what must have been an hour. The light from the window stretched across the rug like it was pointing towards something. And in that stillness, I realized something deeply painful and strangely freeing. She had already left me. Not physically, but emotionally, spiritually, completely. I was still there, clinging to a version of us that only existed in my memory. And so I stood up. I didn't slam any doors. I didn't write a letter. I didn't even pack everything. I just grabbed a bag, my keys, and my dignity, and walked out the door. She didn't call after me. She didn't even wake up. That was the morning I made a choice, to stop waiting for her to come back to me. To stop trying to fix something alone that took two people to build in the first place. But that was only the beginning. What happened next would change everything I thought I knew about our marriage and about her. The first thing I noticed after I left was how loud the world suddenly became. Not in volume, but in presence. The sound of my own shoes hitting the sidewalk outside felt unfamiliar, almost too real. The morning air was cool, with that early autumn bite that brushes against your skin just enough to remind you it's time to let things go. I didn't cry. I didn't feel rage. Just this strange, hovering numbness, like I was walking through fog that hadn't quite lifted. For 14 years, I'd woken up beside Maureen. Even when we weren't talking, when she'd shut me out with silence and cool glances, there was still that physical familiarity, the rhythm of her breath beside mine. Now it was gone, and the emptiness that replaced it wasn't loud or theatrical, it was quiet, and it hurt more than I expected. I checked into a small, month-to-month rental just outside the town where we lived. It wasn't much, just a converted attic space above an older couple's garage, but the moment I stepped inside, I felt something I hadn't felt in months, air that didn't carry the weight of someone else's withdrawal. There were no side glances, no phones glowing in the dark, no invisible barriers pressing against me. Just me, a suitcase, and four walls that didn't expect anything from me. And yet, I still found myself listening for her footsteps out of habit, still reaching for the side of the bed that wasn't there. That first week was brutal in a way I hadn't anticipated. I thought that leaving would bring some kind of clarity, that maybe I'd feel vindicated or strong or even just relieved. But instead, I felt exposed. I walked through the world like I'd lost an arm and kept reaching for things that weren't there. I kept looking at my phone, waiting for her name to pop up. Maybe she'd text something simple, like, "Where are you?" or "Why?" or even "Come home." But there was nothing. Just silence. The same silence I had lived with under the same roof, only now it echoed louder from across town. I didn't tell anyone right away. Not my brother, not my coworker Dale, not even my mom who lives 2 hours away and always suspects something even when nothing's wrong. I didn't want to explain what I couldn't fully understand. It wasn't like I could point to one moment and say, "That's why I left." There was no affair I knew of. No explosive argument. No betrayal I could show as evidence. It was more like emotional erosion, years of tiny neglects, unspoken words, unmet needs, and now the foundation had finally crumbled. And the worst part? I still loved her. I hated how much I still did. I remember sitting on the edge of that attic bed late one night, scrolling through old photos on my phone. There was one from a trip we took to Colorado. Maureen was standing at the edge of a cliff, arms raised like she was greeting the sky, hair flying wild in the wind. I'd taken it right after she laughed at something I said. That version of her, carefree, open, warm, hadn't existed in years. I kept wondering when she'd stopped smiling like that around me. Had I done something? Had I not done enough? The question spun through my head like a carousel that wouldn't stop. It was on day 10 that I finally broke down and emailed her. I kept it short. I just wrote, "Hey, I'm not reaching out to ask for anything. Just wanted to say I'm safe. And I hope you are too." She didn't reply. Not that day. Not the next. And with each passing hour, I felt myself letting go just a little more, but it didn't feel like freedom. It felt like loss. Like tearing off a part of yourself and leaving it behind in the house where it stopped being seen. Then something strange happened. I went to the grocery store that weekend, just a quick trip to grab some essentials, and as I turned the corner in the cereal aisle, I spotted a woman who looked just like Maureen from behind. Same haircut, same denim jacket, same slightly hunched posture. My heart actually skipped. I stepped forward, ready to say something, and she turned around, and it wasn't her. But for those 2 seconds, everything inside me screamed like I was about to see her again. I stood there, stunned, holding a box of oatmeal I didn't even want. That moment stuck with me more than I expected. Because it told me something I hadn't yet admitted. I still wanted her to come after me. To find me. To say that the silence had been a mistake. That she missed me. That I wasn't crazy for leaving. But what I was slowly beginning to understand was something deeper and much harder to face. She might have already moved on in her heart, long before I walked out the door. I wasn't grieving a sudden loss. I was grieving a slow departure I hadn't noticed happening until I was already standing in the ruins of what we used to be. And yet, I hadn't hit the bottom yet. Not even close. What happened next, what I would discover about Maureen's world after I left it, would peel back the curtain on a truth I hadn't been ready to see. And it would make me question everything. Everything I thought I knew about her, and everything I thought I knew about myself. In the days that followed my quiet departure, life moved forward, but I didn't. Not really. I showed up at work, answered emails, nodded during meetings, even laughed at a joke someone made in the break room, but none of it reached me. I was performing a version of myself for the world, like a man stepping on stage every morning with lines he didn't believe in anymore. Inside, I was still stuck in the house I left behind. Still lying awake in that bed where Maureen stopped turning toward me at night. Still playing out conversations we never had and probably never would. I kept wondering how many times she had noticed the distance between us before I did. Had she tried to fight it? Had I missed 100 silent cries for help? Or had she, at some point, simply decided I wasn't the person she wanted to try for anymore? The thing that started gnawing at me the most wasn't the fact that she hadn't reached out. It was the fact that she hadn't even asked why. Not even a single word. No confusion. No, "Can we talk?" Nothing. It was as if my absence confirmed a decision she'd already made long ago, one she hadn't voiced but had accepted quietly in her own way. And the more I sat with that, the more it shook something loose in me. Because for so long, I had equated her silence with sadness, maybe even depression. But what if it wasn't that? What if it was indifference? One evening, I decided to go back to our neighborhood, not to see her, not even to drive by the house, but because I wanted to walk the streets that used to feel familiar. I parked a few blocks away and wandered aimlessly through the streets where we'd once walked our dog together, where we'd argued about landscaping, laughed under Christmas lights, waved to neighbors whose names we barely remembered. It was surreal how little had changed. The same porch lights flickered. The same wind rustled the same trees. But everything inside me had shifted. The world hadn't paused because I was broken. It never does. As I rounded the corner past the old red brick church on Hamlin Street, I saw our old neighbor Judith out walking her beagle. She did a double take when she saw me, then offered a cautious smile. "Lowell? Everything okay?" she asked. I hesitated. I hadn't planned on explaining anything to anyone, but the look in her eyes wasn't nosy, it was human. Kind. I managed a small smile. "Yeah, just needed some air." She nodded slowly. "I haven't seen you around. Thought maybe you two were traveling." I gave a vague shrug. Something like that. I could tell she wanted to ask more, but instead, she patted her dog's head and said, "Well, tell Maureen I said hi." That sentence echoed in my head for hours afterward. Tell Maureen I said hi. Like we were still at we. Like I was still in that life. Like I hadn't already stepped off the edge and disappeared into a quieter existence. It was oddly painful, how people still saw us as a pair, even as the foundation beneath that image was already dust. Back in my attic room that night, I lay on my back and stared at the ceiling fan turning above me. The fan had this faint clicking sound, like a metronome keeping time with a life that no longer belonged to me. And for the first time since I left, I realized something I hadn't dared acknowledge. I didn't want to go back. Not because I didn't love her. I did. Or maybe I loved the version of her I carried in my memory, the woman in the navy blue dress with the crooked smile, the Maureen who used to hum when she cooked and poke fun at my choice in socks. That woman felt like a ghost now, and the silence she left in her place was far too familiar to return to. The next morning, I wrote in a journal I hadn't touched in years. I wrote about how love sometimes ends not with a scream, but with a sigh. How heartbreak can happen while sitting across from someone at dinner, nodding at the same stories, pretending you're still hearing each other when you're not. I wrote about how loneliness isn't always about being alone. It's about being unseen, even when you're sitting in the same room. And that's when it happened. That same morning, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. No name. Just 4 words. "You needed to leave." I stared at it for a long time. My pulse quickened. Was it her? The area code matched ours. But it wasn't Maureen's number, at least not the one I knew. I didn't reply right away. I just sat there, my coffee cooling on the windowsill, my heart pounding like I was standing at the edge of something too big to define. Because in that moment, everything started to feel different. There was something I hadn't been told. Something I hadn't seen. And someone, somewhere, wanted me to know more than Maureen had ever been willing to share. I finally replied. "Who is this?" There was no response. Not that day. Not the next. But the seed had been planted. That simple message cracked open a door I hadn't even known existed. And what lay behind it would change everything. There's a strange kind of tension that grows when a message lingers without a sender. It's not just the mystery of who sent it. It's the space between the question and the answer that begins to consume you. That little gray bubble of maybe hanging in the air. And I lived in that space for 3 days. You needed to leave. 4 words. No name, no context, no follow-up. They were like a whisper in the dark, something meant to be heard but not explained. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe a wrong number. Maybe someone else's drama. But it was the timing that haunted me. I had told no one where I'd gone. No one knew the attic room above the garage, or the side street I parked on, or the exact day I left. Maureen hadn't reached out. Judith thought we were on vacation. So who would know I left? Who would say it like that? Like it was necessary? Like it was the only thing left to do? I didn't text back again. Not out of pride, but because I wasn't sure I wanted to know what came next. I'd already spent so much time hoping for words from Maureen, and now that I'd finally received a message from someone, anyone, it felt wrong. Too convenient. Too perfectly timed. Like someone was watching from the edges. By the 4th night, I was restless. I'd gone to bed early, hoping sleep would grant me an escape, but my mind wouldn't let go. The shadows in the room seemed to stretch longer than usual. I replayed the last 2 months in my head, every dinner she skipped, every weekend she claimed she was too tired, every glance that passed through me instead of at me. And slowly, something that had been buried beneath my pain started pushing its way to the surface. It wasn't just detachment. It wasn't just coldness. It was avoidance. She had been avoiding me. I got up and sat at the small desk near the window. I opened my laptop, unsure what I was even looking for. I typed in Maureen's name, just out of habit. Then I opened a browser tab and searched our address. Nothing. Then, on impulse, I opened one of her old social media profiles that I hadn't looked at in months. She rarely used it anymore, but I needed something. A thread to pull. Anything. And that's when I noticed it. Her last seen status had changed frequently over the last week. Not suspicious in itself, except she hadn't posted or commented in over a year. I clicked through her friend list, not looking for anyone in particular, just scanning faces. And then I paused. A man named Spencer Kane. The name struck a strange chord. I didn't know him personally, but it was familiar. I clicked his profile. Private. No visible posts. Just a profile photo, a blurry shot of him on a hiking trail, sunglasses, short beard, baseball cap. I went back and searched my own phone messages, scrolling through old group invites and contacts until I found it. Spencer had worked at the same place Maureen did, at least 2 years ago. She'd mentioned him once, casually, as someone in her department who transferred to the Atlanta office. That was it. That's all she said. But his name had come back to me now like a song you forgot you knew. Something felt off. I looked at the timestamps. Spencer and Maureen had been active around the same times, early morning, very late at night. I told myself it didn't mean anything. But then again, what did I know anymore? I shut the laptop, feeling ridiculous. Was I really sitting here connecting dots between online statuses and old coworkers? Was I that desperate for meaning? Yes. Yes, I was. Because when someone stops speaking to you, your mind doesn't sit still. It starts spinning, creating narratives, filling in blanks. It searches for reasons like a hound with no leash, chasing down even the faintest scent of truth. The next day, I didn't go to work. I called in and said I needed time, no explanation. I drove to a park Maureen and I used to visit in better years. There was a long trail there, not too difficult, winding through trees that always felt older than the town itself. I parked and walked until the noise of traffic faded and only the sound of birds and my own footsteps remained. I sat on a bench near the water and closed my eyes. And in that silence, something broke loose inside me, not a thought, but a memory. It was about 7 months ago. A Friday. She'd come home late, claiming a meeting had run long. She was dressed too casually for a meeting, jeans, a loose t-shirt, no blazer or work bag. I'd asked, how'd it go? And she answered, exhausting. I just want to shower and sleep. But now, sitting on that bench, I could see the moment more clearly. The way her hands trembled slightly as she untied her shoes. The way she avoided eye contact when I leaned in to kiss her cheek. The faint smell of aftershave, not mine. I hadn't let myself think about it then. But now, in the stillness, the memory played differently. It wasn't just emotional distance. There had been something else. A quiet shift. A subtle deception. And I had ignored it, because love, when it's wounded, becomes very good at pretending. I stood up and looked around at the trees, feeling like they somehow understood more than I did. I whispered aloud, more to the wind than to myself, did you leave before I did, Maureen? And I just didn't notice. There was no answer. But the breeze pushed against my chest like a nod I didn't want to accept. That night, when I returned to my rented room, the message on my phone had changed. The same number. A new line. You weren't supposed to find out this way. And just like that, the silence that once suffocated me had turned into something else entirely. A warning. A breadcrumb. A beginning. The words sat on my screen like a riddle from someone who knew too much. You weren't supposed to find out this way. I must have read that line 100 times. It carried no name, no tone, no direction, just those 8 words, floating in a sea of silence. I didn't respond. I didn't have anything to say. Because I didn't know what I was finding out. I only knew it was coming from someone who had been watching from the sidelines. Or worse, someone who had been involved. That night, I didn't sleep. I paced. I stared out the window of that attic apartment and watched a tree swaying in the wind like it was trying to shake something loose. And my thoughts, they didn't come in a neat row. They came like waves, surging, crashing, retreating, then coming again, harder, heavier. I kept trying to remind myself of what I knew. That Maureen had changed. That she'd stopped seeing me. That her absence had arrived long before my exit. That whatever this message was about, it wasn't just paranoia. It wasn't grief dressing up as suspicion. Still, my mind wandered to absurd places. Maybe the texts were some prank. Maybe it was a cruel friend or some strange mistake. But deep down, I didn't believe that. I knew something was unraveling, and I had already pulled too hard on the thread to stop now. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done since I left. I opened up my old laptop, the one I hadn't touched in months, and logged into the shared cloud storage Maureen and I used to use for household files. We'd mostly kept receipts, scans of bills, and old trip itineraries there. Nothing exciting. But sometimes the mundane holds more truth than the dramatic. It's in the overlooked places where people leave pieces of themselves. I dug through the folders aimlessly at first. Utilities, tax docs, travel 2016, Maureen work receipts. And then I saw a file that didn't belong. It was labeled Sunview. That meant nothing to me. We didn't know anyone with that name, and we'd never lived on a street like that. I hovered over it for a moment before opening it. Inside was a scan of a lease agreement. My heart skipped. It was for an apartment, an upscale unit in a building called Sunview Lofts about 20 minutes from our home. The lease had started 3 months ago. The name on the lease was not Maureen's. It was Spencer Kane, but listed under authorized occupants was Maureen H. Kessler, her full name. No mistaking it. I leaned back in my chair. The pieces were falling faster now. The nights she stayed late. The coldness. The strange emotional absence. It wasn't just space she needed. It was escape. And she hadn't just emotionally checked out. She had physically planted herself in another life while I still lived in the illusion of the old one. My mouth went dry as I kept reading. She had signed it with her initials. She had planned this. It wasn't impulsive. It wasn't a one-time mistake. It was a decision she had already committed to months before I even realized she was drifting. I closed the laptop gently, as if handling something fragile. But inside, everything was breaking. And I didn't feel anger. Not yet. What I felt was shame. Deep, sharp, unforgiving shame. How had I not seen it? How had I slept beside her every night while she was building a second life, brick by brick, elsewhere? I left the apartment and drove aimlessly for hours, letting the highway pull me further away from the places I used to call familiar. I ended up in a small coastal town I hadn't been to in years. It was the kind of place with weathered boardwalks, mom-and-pop diners, and fishermen who didn't talk much. I parked near the pier and sat on a bench that overlooked the gray ocean. The waves rolled in, slow and endless, reminding me of time itself, how it just keeps moving whether you're ready or not. I sat there until the sky turned pink with evening. And for the first time, I let the weight fall on me. Not the betrayal itself, but the quiet, long suffering I had swallowed to keep our marriage afloat. I had bent myself into shapes trying not to disturb her. I had silenced my own hurt to protect hers. And yet, she had left anyway. Not with a bang, not even with a goodbye, but with a lease and a whisper and a door I hadn't seen her close. When I returned to the attic later that night, my phone buzzed. Same number. You need to see it for yourself. 9 a.m., Sunview Lofts. Side entrance. I didn't reply. I didn't ask who they were. I just stared at the message, heart pounding, breath shallow, unsure if I was walking toward truth or another illusion. The next morning, I arrived 10 minutes early. I had no idea what I was about to see, but I knew one thing. After this, there would be no going back. The morning I drove to Sunview Lofts, I expected to feel something dramatic, rage, panic, dread. But instead, I felt strangely still, like I was floating through the morning, not quite awake, not quite dreaming. The city moved around me as usual, cars humming, sidewalks filling, birds chirping without a care, but for me, time slowed. I wasn't thinking about what I might see. I wasn't imagining Maureen in someone else's arms. My mind had already accepted that much, even if my heart hadn't. I was thinking about how long I'd been asleep to my own life. How many mornings I'd gotten up and packed her lunch or folded her laundry or reminded her where she left her keys, and none of it had been enough to anchor her. I pulled into a side lot behind the building, just like the message instructed. It was a modern complex, sleek, minimal, all steel and glass. Nothing like the life Maureen and I had built together, which was rooted in creaky floorboards and mismatched furniture and paint chips we argued about on Sunday mornings. This place felt curated, impersonal, the kind of place you run to when you want to erase the life you've left behind. I waited in the car for a few minutes, then got out and walked slowly toward the side entrance. The air smelled like fresh concrete and rain. There was a keypad by the door, and just as I approached, it buzzed and clicked open on its own. Someone was watching. A man stood inside the lobby, mid-30s maybe, shorter than me, hair cropped close, jacket half-zipped like he'd just thrown it on. He looked nervous. His eyes darted to mine, then away again. "You're Lowell, right?" I nodded. My voice caught in my throat for a second before I finally managed. Who are you? He didn't answer right away. He just motioned toward the elevator. You need to see it. I'll explain everything. But you deserve to see it first. I don't know why I followed him. Maybe because I'd come this far. Maybe because the worst had already happened and now I just wanted the truth, raw and complete. Maybe because I was too tired to care if this was a setup or a mistake. All I knew was that the numbness had settled so deep into my bones that I was running on instinct alone. We rode the elevator in silence. It stopped at the 5th floor. The hallway was quiet, lined with identical doors, beige walls, soft lighting. We stopped at Unit 512. He hesitated, then knocked. There was no answer at first. Then footsteps. And then Maureen opened the door. My breath caught. She was wearing a long sweater I didn't recognize, her hair tied back in a way I hadn't seen in years. She looked comfortable, relaxed in a way she never did around me anymore. When her eyes met mine, everything froze. Lowell. Her voice broke on the second syllable. She looked past me to the man beside me. Her face drained. Her hand gripped the door tighter. What are you doing here? She asked. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I was trying to process what I was seeing. Behind her, inside the apartment, were 2 wine glasses on the counter. A throw blanket draped across a couch. A photo on the side table of her and Spencer, smiling at a vineyard, arms around each other. Not a work event. Not a casual friend. This wasn't a secret fling or something she regretted. This was a life. Built without me. Carefully arranged, meticulously hidden. And I had been nothing more than the man she left in the rearview mirror, standing still while she moved on. I looked at the man beside me. He wasn't Spencer. I still didn't know who he was. Maureen's voice cut through the air. You shouldn't have come here. Something about that sentence, about the way she said it, made something inside me shatter. Not, I'm sorry. Not, let me explain. Not, I didn't mean to hurt you. Just, you shouldn't have come. As if I was the one trespassing on something pure. I turned and walked down the hallway without saying a word. The man followed me, then called out once we reached the stairwell. Wait, please. I didn't bring you here to hurt you. I brought you here because you needed the whole picture. I stopped, slowly turned. I'm Ellis, he said. I used to work in the same office as Maureen and Spencer. I left months ago. I was friends with her. But I started seeing things. I felt guilty. I knew what was happening, and I didn't say anything. But when I heard you'd left your house and she still hadn't told you, when she just carried on, I couldn't stomach it. You didn't deserve that. I stared at him. I wanted to speak, to say something cutting or profound or even just thank you, but the words wouldn't come. Not because I had nothing to say, because I had too much. A tidal wave of thoughts, of emotions, of memories, all crashing into each other. Ellis gave me a sad look. You're not crazy, Lowell. She's been here almost every other night for months. She has keys. Her car's on the lease. She planned all of this. I nodded slowly. I know, I whispered. Because I did. Somewhere deep down, I'd known for a long time. That night, back in the attic, I sat on the floor with every light off. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even move. I just sat there and let the silence settle over me like a blanket I didn't want but couldn't take off. The truth was finally in front of me. But it didn't bring peace. It brought clarity, and that was far more painful. Because now I understood what she couldn't say out loud. She had already chosen a life that didn't include me, and she was never planning to tell me. I didn't leave the attic apartment for 2 days after that morning at Sunview. I couldn't. I wasn't paralyzed, not physically, but emotionally, mentally, spiritually. I was suspended in place. I ate only when the growling of my stomach embarrassed me. I drank coffee that had long gone cold. I didn't answer my phone. I ignored texts from my manager asking when I planned to come back to work. I let the world keep spinning while I stood still in a room that no longer felt temporary. The air was stale, the walls closing in, but somehow it felt safer than anything beyond the front door. It was hard to explain, even to myself, why the confrontation with Maureen hadn't brought the closure I thought it would. I had prepared myself for 1,000 versions of that day, imagining all the ways she might try to defend herself, lie, cry, even blame me, but I wasn't prepared for the apathy. I wasn't ready for the blank look in her eyes. For the fact that she didn't try to stop me. She didn't chase after me. She didn't say my name with the kind of hesitation that signals regret. She just stood there, halfway behind a door, protecting the life she had carefully built without me, and waited for me to walk away. And walk away I did. But walking away doesn't mean healing. Sometimes it means carrying more than you left with. I thought back to the earliest days, before the house, before the mortgage, before the rituals of married life dulled to shine. I remembered lying in bed beside her, tracing invisible circles on her back, listening to her tell stories about her childhood as if the world outside the bedroom didn't exist. I remembered the time we got caught in the rain on a weekend hike, how she laughed and danced in the downpour like a woman who had never feared anything. That's the Maureen I had fallen in love with. That's the person I thought I married. And now, I couldn't reconcile that image with the woman who stared at me in cold silence just days ago. It was like mourning a ghost while the living body still walked and breathed in the same city. On the third morning, I finally stepped outside. The air smelled of dry leaves and chimney smoke, the crisp November flavor that signals the quiet beginning of winter. I didn't have a destination. I just walked. Through back streets. Past diners with fogged windows. Past kids waiting for school buses, people on phones, joggers with earbuds. No one looked at me. And that anonymity was oddly comforting. I wasn't the guy whose wife cheated out here. I was just another man wearing a coat, trying to stay warm, trying to feel like he still belonged to something. I ended up at a small cafe we used to frequent, tucked into a quiet corner near the university. It hadn't changed. Same green awning, same mismatched chairs, same smell of cinnamon and burned espresso. I took a seat by the window, ordered black coffee, and just sat there, letting the hum of other people's lives wash over me. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I had to pretend. That's when I saw her. Not Maureen, someone else. A young woman, maybe in her late 20s, sitting across the room with a laptop, typing with a strange kind of urgency. Her brow furrowed, eyes narrowing with concentration. Every so often, she'd pause, glance out the window, then dive back into whatever she was writing. There was something familiar in that rhythm. Not her face or features, but the energy, the presence, the aliveness I hadn't seen in my own marriage in years. It hit me hard, because it reminded me that connection, real connection, still existed somewhere out there. That not every bond grows cold. That people still share words and stories and effort and presence when they care. And suddenly, I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad. I was just ready. Ready to stop carrying a version of my life that no longer existed. Ready to stop clinging to a love that had expired quietly, without fanfare, like a note left in a drawer no one reads. Ready to start figuring out who I was without Maureen's silence pressed up against my own voice. I didn't speak to Maureen again. I didn't send her a letter. I didn't ask for an explanation. I didn't beg for closure. Because I had finally accepted that silence was the closure. It had always been. The moment she stopped choosing me, whether with a lie, or a slow retreat, or a signed lease with another man, that was the end of the story we were writing together. The last chapter didn't need a twist or a scream. It ended with a period she was too cowardly to type, so I had to do it for her. Back in the attic that night, I lit a candle. I don't know why. I'd never been that kind of guy. But the flame felt important, symbolic. I sat in its glow and said her name out loud one last time. Not with bitterness. Not with hope. Just with truth. Maureen. And that was it. No big moment. No sweeping resolution. Just breath. Stillness. The beginning of something new, uncertain, unfamiliar, but finally mine again. Sometimes closure doesn't come in the form of a conversation or an apology. Sometimes it doesn't come from the person who broke your heart at all. Sometimes closure is a quiet morning when you wake up and realize that the weight you've been dragging behind you doesn't feel as heavy anymore. That morning came for me 3 weeks after the last time I saw Maureen. I opened my eyes to soft sunlight pouring through the slanted attic window. The world outside was wrapped in the early signs of winter, branches bare, roofs dusted with frost, breath visible in the air. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was waking up in a stranger's life. I was still in that little attic room, still surrounded by chipped paint and hand-me-down furniture, but it felt different now. Warmer. Quieter. Mine. Something had shifted inside me. I wasn't waiting anymore for her to call, for answers, for some invisible thread to pull me backward. The questions that had haunted me had lost their sharpness. I no longer needed to know how long it had gone on, how many lies were told, or why she hadn't said goodbye. The truth was simple. We had become people who no longer belonged in the same story. And though her silence hurt, I could finally see it for what it was, a reflection of her limits, not mine. That day, I packed my things not out of urgency, but because I was ready to move forward. I returned the key to the landlord with a thank you note and drove to a small town about an hour south, where a friend had offered me a guest room while I figured out what came next. It wasn't a fresh start in the dramatic sense. No palm trees, no new name, no midlife crisis. But it was a soft beginning, and that's all I needed. I started walking more. I found a used bookstore run by a retired couple who let me hang around even when I didn't buy anything. I signed up for a weekend woodworking class, something I hadn't done since college, and discovered that there's a strange comfort in shaping something with your own hands. Watching a block of wood become something useful, something solid, something that holds its form. And then, without searching, without expecting, it happened. Her name was Camille. I met her at the bookstore one rainy afternoon. We both reached for the same coffee-stained paperback on a display table. She laughed and let me have it, saying she only liked the movie anyway. We ended up talking about old books, bad movie adaptations, and how neither of us had read anything that made us cry in a while. It wasn't fireworks. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was a simple, honest conversation between two people who had learned how to sit in their own quiet without fear. Over the next few weeks, we saw each other again casually at first. Coffee, walks, shared silence that didn't feel like rejection, but comfort. Camille didn't ask about Maureen, and I didn't offer much. Not because I was hiding anything, but because I didn't need her to carry that weight. That story belonged in the past, and I was building something new slowly, carefully, authentically. One evening, we sat on a bench by the lake as the sky turned the color of melted gold. She leaned her head against my shoulder without saying a word. And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. Peace. Not the kind that demands forgetting, but the kind that arrives when you stop running. When you stop asking for what someone could never give you. When you finally forgive yourself for not seeing it sooner. I don't know what the future holds with Camille. I'm not rushing to define it. All I know is that I'm showing up for it fully, without resentment, without pretending, without silence. I haven't spoken to Maureen since that day at Sunview. I don't expect to. There's nothing left to say. But I do think of her sometimes, not with bitterness, but with distance. Like a town I once lived in. A place that taught me something. A place I had to leave in order to return to myself. And maybe that's the strange gift heartbreak gives us. Not clarity, not justice, but direction. A push out of what no longer fits. A return to your own name, your own breath, your own voice. This wasn't the life I planned. But it just might be the one I was meant to find. Lowell.